Let me hand things over to Julie Mortimer to introduce our next speaker.
All right, thanks for coming back from lunch. I'm Julie Mortimer at Boston College. Happy to have everybody here. I'm going to hand it over right away to Anoosha. And we're going to go just in order. We have 4 people and 90 minutes, so we're going to do sort of 18-minute presentations and 5-minute Q&As, and the speakers can reclaim their Q&A at their choice. So I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Julie. Okay. Yep, I did. So, hello everyone. This is Anoosha Chanda. I'm a senior software engineer at Pandora. And my presentation is on music identification system. Instead of addressing music data issues directly, we are planning to introduce some tools to address those issues by using music identification systems. And at a high level, this is the agenda. I'll be covering something about metadata and some challenges, and introduce a couple of solutions to identify music, and end with a path to cleaner catalog. So what is music metadata? As most of us know, it includes track information, album information, labels, genres, rights, etc. But it also has some identifiers like ISRC, UPC. ISRC is supposed to be a unique identifier for all recordings, and UPC is supposed to be a unique identifier for album, but in fact they are not managed well, and we'll see why in the next few slides. And before 2016, which is before direct deals, Pandora used to buy all the content from different websites or different online tools, or buy all the CDs and then spin the tracks using statutory licensing system and pay royalties through sound exchange. But after direct deals, we started getting all the content from labels directly. When we look at the metadata closely, they all follow a particular standard called DDEX. DDEX is a consortium which is used for digital supply chain, and it contains all the metadata that we want to spin a track on any streaming service. So the primary challenge with music metadata is, even though there are identifiers, they are not properly maintained because of several reasons, and most important reason is artists can change their contracts with labels. When an artist moves his record all tracks from one record label to another record label, they may or may not retain the same ISRCs, because ISRCs are typically generated by label. And if we end up getting multiple ISRCs for the same recording, do we have to assume that they are different recordings, or do we have to think that, okay, it's just the same track title, even though ISRC is different? Do we want to assume that it's the same recording? And we can get multiple deliveries from same record label. Whenever a record label fixes some of the music metadata, they redeliver the same content again, but with some minor variation in the metadata. And our systems should be able to process all those. And catalog has been increasing a lot lately, and it's pretty hard to start fixing all the metadata and keep up with the incoming catalog. Instead, we should find another way to address this problem. Also, there are multiple versions of the same recording. Here is one example. Sorry for the clutter there. First example is by Hotline Bling by Drake, and we get single version, original album, some collaborations, and some remix versions. And second one is My Way by Frank Sinatra. We get live versions, karaoke, remaster versions, and cover versions. And to give a little overview or a sneak peek into a world of a recording, which is Stand By Me, and it looks something like this. Like, this is a giant clusters of all Stand By Me recordings. Understand that this doesn't include all the remix versions or tributes or any other cover versions. This is just Stand By Me recording. And if I zoom in one of the clusters, all the notes represent recordings, and all the edges represent how closely they are related together. And we ran some experiments with acoustic fingerprinting, and that's how we implemented this one. Sometimes tracks can have same track title, but sometimes they can have a different variation of track title, like Stand By Me within Stand By Me, or Stand By Me with year range, like 1950 or something like that. And sometimes that's me scrolling through the graph. Now we have hit like another giant cluster, and sometimes the tracks can also have completely different track title. We don't even know what the track title means, but it just has the same recording. And sometimes we also get artist name inside the track title, and the track title can be completely irrelevant. I just leave it to load for 1 minute. Yeah, the last entry is like, yeah, it just grows forever. Yeah, that's it. So how do we solve identifying the music? We used some acoustic features of audio, and we implemented audio fingerprinting. Audio fingerprinting is nothing but whenever we get any track, we look at the audio signal using the pulse code modulation, downsample it to a particular kilohertz frequency, so it follows the same mono signal. And after we get the mono signal, we look at lower frequencies within the 32 band subband decomposition. The reason why we choose lower frequencies is we want to identify music that can be identified by humans. Humans can't detect all the high frequency range acoustic signals, so we look at only the lower frequency ranges. And in the lower frequency range, we look at the peaks. Wherever there is a peak which crosses a particular threshold, count it as an onset, and we count all the onsets at, including all the time, and we calculate difference between each onset, and we record all the time. And at the end, we have a hash, which is a base64 encoded version, and that's what we call it as a fingerprint. And a fingerprint looks something like this. So how we process the fingerprint? Hello? It's just by now. Yeah.
Let me do this.
Did I step on? It's all right. I have a loud voice. Yeah, I can manage. Are you able to hear me?
I think the mic is picking you up.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay. Whenever we get any track, we fingerprint it, and we query on Solar Cloud, which is an open source search platform. Solar Cloud has all. Solar Cloud uses something called reverse indexing to serve all the documents that has a particular matching documents within the input search query. And when we get all the documents, we process them and we arrange them in the descending order of the scores. And we look at the first result and see if it's the same fingerprint or a different fingerprint. If it is different, then we try to find out all the closest matches within the documents. And whenever we find any closest match or an exact match, save it in the database. If we don't find any match, then ingest it on to Solar. So at any point of time, Solar Cloud has a unique collection of all fingerprints. And then we serve all the results from database to other internal systems. And finally, it will be served to the listener. So now we have implemented fingerprinting system. How do we measure the performance of fingerprinting system? It is used with precision and recall. Precision is nothing but not too many false positives. False positive means we detected it as a match, but in fact it is not. And false negative is we did not detect it as a match, but in fact it is a match. You should have detected it when you ran the algorithm. And fingerprinting did pretty good, but we observed it when we started comparing the results with other open source open source fingerprinting systems and commercial licenses. We looked at Grace Note, Audible Magic, and Audio ID, etc. But And when we looked at the precision and recall, we did not want to compromise on the turnaround time. Usually all the commercial licenses take at minimum some X amount of time to process the fingerprints and return you all the results. So we wanted to have flexibility around the algorithm, so we implemented it in-house. And there are certain limitations in few genres like reggae, classical, and EDM. It is because of the way they sound so similar if you look at the acoustic signal. And now we understood what fingerprinting system does and how can we apply it to other areas. We did something called grouping. Now we know all the recordings or all the tracks that sound similar. Why don't we group all recordings that are meant to be together? And you can apply all the tags like, okay, I don't want to analyze all the songs in this group, but instead I can do the genomic analysis or any other analysis on one recording, and I can assign like, okay, this is a rock, or the guitar sound on this one is so clear, or this is not of high quality, etc. And this can also be applied to albums, labels, and artists. Artist grouping and label grouping can be more tricky because there can be multiple artists with the same name, and we definitely want to look at different other metadata that differentiates them. And for labels, sometimes label can have different imprints, they can have different names in different territories. So we, to resolve all those problems, we looked at Open Music Encyclopedia. Some of the sources are Music Brains, Discogs, and DBpedia. And when we looked at them, Open Music Encyclopedia, they started their projects to address a problem to maintain a single source to look at all the music metadata, but in fact, they did not address a whole problem. Even though when we look at all the 3 different systems individually, they conflict with each other in most of the cases. And because of that, we needed data science to fix this problem. So we keep on learning from the mistakes. We give some predictions to each parameter, and based on the feedback that we get, we train our system and we build a machine learning model on top of it. So we have all the automated systems, but still, why do we depend on human curation at Pandora? The main reason is we definitely want our automated systems to be validated. Even though we are performing well, I mean, even to think that we are performing well, we need someone to validate it. There is no open source music database that says like, okay, you've done a great job or you have not done a great job. So for all those, we depend on human curation, and sometimes we depend on human curation to fix clean and explicit values, which is quite complicated, and sometimes we depend on them for fixing artwork, etc. And human curation at Pandora is doing something like a quality control at scale, and Taylor Kirch will give a detailed explanation on what is the role of human curation. And so given all the things, what is the path to a cleaner catalog? Now we know that there are a lot of things that we are not able to identify correctly, so why don't we look at the publisher data? ISRCs we get from labels, but from publishers we can also get something called ISWC, which is International Standard Musical Work Code, and this is usually assigned when a song is registered, and it's assigned by Performing Rights Organization, and it's supposed to be unique even if the copyrights change, or even if a record moves from one record label to another record label. We are making some progress on these projects, this project, and there are some DDEX working groups which have already started working on addressing this issue. And lastly, why don't we build a global music database with the help of human curators, librarians, and we have a ton of access, and we have a lot of people that are very good at music industry. So why don't we build it ourselves? And with that, I would like to thank everyone, and we can take questions.
Could you give an example of 2 tracks that were not an exact match but were an approximate match? Where is that?
Yeah, sometimes the sound quality can differ, even though we use whitening filter to avoid any resonance or static noise in the signal. Sometimes we can have some noise or some background score, some background music which we can't completely avoid, and in those cases they will be detected as a close match, but instead of exact match. Please.
Thank you. Just to make sure I understood your audio fingerprinting process. You take a band-limited version of the signal in mono, and then you track peaks in time.
Yes.
So any then version of the piece that is at a different tempo will show as not a match unless you normalize the time. So unless you look at relationships,
Yes.
time ratios versus.
So when we detect all the onsets are at the peaks, but we calculate difference between each onset and record the time when the onset is recorded, when the onsets are recorded, and all the hash pairs will be unique if the song follows the same sequence.
Okay, so the ratios will be unique,
Yes.
not the time difference.
Not the time differences.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So unless somebody makes an interpretation, of course, that has rubato and accelerando, right? Which can be different.
Yep.
You know Shazam
Yes, I know.
uses the identification
Yep.
codes.
Yes.
And SoundHound uses a different methodology that allows it to recognize even if I hum it.
Yep. Yes.
Are you aware of what technology they use, and if they use the kind of audio fingerprint that you use versus a cognitive model?
I think SoundCloud is using a different
SoundHound.
SoundHound.
Hound.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure about SoundHound, but there are some open music, open fingerprinting systems like Audio ID. Audio ID is used. It is not completely open source. Somebody has to buy if they want to integrate in their system. So I believe Audio ID is used in Shazam, and we were able to look at how Econist was built, and Econist has built something called EcoPrint, which is also similar in most of the cases, and many other. We also looked at Grace Note and Audible Magic, and Grace Note and Audible Magic. They did not share their code, but based on our precision and recall versus their precision and recall, Audible Magic and ours overlapped a lot. But Grace Note was completely different, so I'm not quite sure like what they used. Yeah, I don't think it's working.
I think it's working now.
Okay.
Okay, so you guys create a Pandora, you create your own audio fingerprints?
Yes.
Do you ingest any audio fingerprints from third parties?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We don't. No, we don't. But whenever any indie submissions happen, like an independent artist can submit their own tracks, but those tracks will also be fingerprinted, and they will also follow the same process. But it's an artist submitting their track, so it's like directly. It's not from a third party. Yeah, please.
Yes, Robert Fink from UCLA. I'm a musicologist by training, so I focused in on this notion of human curation. So can you tell us a little bit about the actual sociological profile of these curators? Like, who are they? What kind of qualifications do they have? Where do you find them? What's the job like?
Yeah, to answer the question directly, I was just going to say that Taylor Kirch is presenting on human curation after this presentation. Yeah, okay. She will give a high level or maybe detailed answer to that question.
The other question I wanted to ask was just simply, have you tried to do anything? I can see, and I know this is not musical, I can see just saying classical can take care of itself. But the other genre, like EDM, is reasonably big. Do you have some kind of workaround?
Yeah, we did something like a hackathon in the office where we outsourced other employees from different projects, and we gave some samples from different genres, and we asked them to detect whether it's a same match or a close match or it's completely different. And based on that, we trained our model. But there are certain limitations in few tracks, but we are able to do it good after the database after the data scientist effort. Yeah, we are improving day by day. It's the progress is still happening at Pandora.
You talked about the need for an consolidated system. Can you maybe talk about the users having a stake or interest in building into those, and then also in response to how does the blockchain play into this?
Yeah. It sounds so idealistic. I would definitely want to build something to link ISWC to ISRC because we expect that it would fix a lot of inconsistencies in the metadata and that will solve half of our problem, but still, even to build such system, it needs a lot of effort and a lot of research. And one of our content licensing directors, he is a member of DDEX panel, or I don't know, DDEX board members, I believe, and his name is Tony Brook. He got to know about some other working groups which have already started making progress on it. So yeah, I'm interested in that, but I don't know if I can solve the problem like in a year or in a time, in a particular time. Yeah, that's pretty challenging. Yeah, please. No. Yeah, Music Brains and Discogs, they usually have all the discography of different artists, labels, and even the tracks. But sometimes when we looked at their databases, they publish their databases on their websites. When we compared all of them, sometimes labels and Music Brains don't agree at all with labels and on Discogs. So how do we make sure which is doing good, or what is the prediction that I should give for labels from Discogs versus labels from Music Brains? So now, because we have a lot of curators and a lot of other folks, why don't we build a system which addresses most of the other people's concerns? This is not something we already started making progress on it. This is something in our agenda where we want to get back to it when we have time or so. Yeah. Sure. Cool, thank you.
Testing? Testing? Works for me.
You got the magic touch.
Stay within 12 inches of it and we're set.
Where do I find them all? Presentations. Yeah, I'm too tall for this one. Should I lean over? Yeah, okay, like this. Okay, all right, so, hi, my name is Derek Sellin. I think I will spend a little bit of time on this slide, sort of to explain why I'm here. I feel I'm a bit of an outsider looking in, at least for now. And first, I'd like to thank the organizers for accepting this paper, which was actually a brief paper published in early February this year. And also thanks to, of course, where is he? He's just stepped out. No, so Dave Bogan, who brought this conference to my attention, his name will come up a couple times, and he's speaking later today in this same session here. Kind of briefly my background. I have an engineering degree, master's in aerospace engineering, which is not why I'm here. I spent about 22 years in the tech field, on the business side of tech, in Nokia, in Broadcom, in Symbian, which was a smartphone operating system company established 9 years before there was ever an iPhone, and now 8 years in Intel. And I woke up about a year and a half ago, January 1st, and decided I needed to get passion into my work, and I started thinking through where passion could come from, environment, education, healthcare, but this just sounded like more tech work, and so music was the obvious answer for me, music tech, somehow to get involved there. So I did a lot of networking, I went to a lot of events, and I came across a couple things. One was a lot of talk about blockchain, which kind of came to me through, I got involved with some startups, and I got interested in, or introduced to the Open Music Initiative, so I've been a sort of participant and more of an observer. I got to be involved in that, which is an initiative of Berklee College of Music. So first of all, I got so excited that people actually get paid to think about these problems. And so that was part of my motivation to really try to make this shift. I ended up taking a package from Intel, and when they laid off 12,000 people last summer, and family reasons took me to Finland. And I met up with an ex-colleague who is Timo Seppälä, who's the other author on this sort of brief industry primer. He'd published a lot on blockchain in Finland, and he works at this think tank called ETLA, which in English is, I guess, the Research Institute of the Finnish Economy. And so we met, and that led to my getting very excited, wrote this paper together, and then I re-enrolled in a PhD program, and I'm now just at the beginning of my stage 2, beginning work on my dissertation and doing my research methods classes. So I've never spoken to a room full of economists and academics. So like I said, I feel like a bit of an outsider looking in, but nonetheless. So the intent of this paper was originally going to be blockchain in the music industry, but as I started working on this, we decided to step back and say, hey, let's look at the music industry. What's the current state of affairs on the infrastructure side? Kind of what are the problems, what are the challenges, and then begin to outline future work, which is going to form my dissertation. So at the end, I get into a little bit of that, and I'm very welcome, very open to feedback on that. So in the interest of time, I see a timer already ticking down, so I'll skip this. Well, I guess I'll just highlight that the sort of the underpinnings of more on the future work that I'll be working on is around industry architecture and around platforms and multi-sided platforms and such. And again, this is more of an industry overview from a sort of platform and technology and process and infrastructure perspective. So motivation, I think we've a lot of presentations have talked about this, and everyone in this room knows this. Consumption is increasing, but revenues are way below where there should be, and a lot of positive outlook today and yesterday, and that's great. I share in that optimism and I believe in the forecasts of growth ahead. But I think there's what I'm seeing in looking at this. Is that sort of where can we recapture some of that value, right? And I think there's a couple areas. One is this fact that not all payments that are due to a creator ever actually get through to that creator. And I guess, roughly speaking, the fact that if money goes to the wrong people or doesn't get, basically if the money goes somewhere, if the money gets paid to the wrong people, it's kind of this black box problem. The money's in black boxes, we don't quite know where to, people don't know how to get it, or it doesn't end up getting to the right people. So that's really an efficiency in the platforms, in the infrastructure question. Then there's this value gap problem, which I'm not going to address here. Is a tenth of a penny the right amount of money for a stream? Is how is music valued and such? So that's to me that's perhaps a later stage problem. I mean, it's a current problem, but for me, a later stage problem. And then, growing the pie is then innovation. So I see a black box problem, I see the value gap issue, and I see, innovation to drive, to make the pie bigger, get more people to sign up for services and pay for them. And this is, of course, doesn't address things like piracy. So the scope of this discussion is really around the black boxes of transparency, which really means the infrastructure and processes and for payments and metadata. So I'm sandwiched between two metadata people, so I will really keep my comments very contained there because I've got experts on either side of me. And this graph is really, there's nothing really new in this recorded. This is a U.S. perspective. I wrote this paper in Finland, but you know, you look at the U.S. as a market, a leading market. But the key, for me, the key takeaway is that, you know, the pie is smaller than it should be, and really, when the revenues are so small in the industry, even though it's turned a corner, accurate accounting is really important, right? I mean, there's especially now, there's less money, there's more people, there's more music getting created, there's more people on the planet consuming music, and more people easily creating and releasing music. So accurate accounting is more important than ever. I don't think I have the time to really run through this, and I tried to develop a model, and so I put into this deck a couple graphics from the paper just to liven up the deck a bit. I tried to look at sort of, this slide should be called A Tale of Two Copyrights, right? As a kind of, there's two copyrights in music. Probably most people in this room know this, but there's the musical composition itself, and then there's the sound recording, and these copyrights sort of follow their own paths. The musical work or the copyright is owned by the songwriter or the publisher, and then it's the use of that copyright is the use of the license is tracked by rights societies, PROs, like in the U.S., the BMI, CSAC, ASCAP, et cetera. And then the sound recording is owned by the recording artist or the label, if there is a label, and then is distributed. Now, I should have highlighted earlier on that I'm very focused on obviously the digital distribution, not really looking at the entire every possible format, but focused on digital. When you look at then the role of an aggregator or distributor, they actually are in a very central point in this chain, because they, well, in a physical environment, you know exactly how many records are sold. In a digital environment, if you're selling downloads or pushing downloads into the system or streams into the system or music into the system to be streamed, there is accounting there. So there should be very good records on actual consumption. So they are in the value chain, whereas the rights societies aren't actually like directly in the value chain. I wonder if I've kind of covered everything I meant to cover on this one. So I think what we'll get to is, what I'll try to get to here is that the issues, I think, are greater for the songwriters than for on the sound recording side, because of an issue that was just covered around the lack of connection between the ISRC and the ISWC. So I tried to do a simplified, like, single model for revenue flow and among all these players, and all I can really highlight here is that copyrights go from left to right and money goes from right to left. Because really, and there is no single model that will cover every possible engagement and business deal. Highlight a couple of those things here, you know, there's endless permutations on the picture that I just showed. Maybe not endless, I'm sure somebody could come up with a cap on that, but and it's a dynamic situation. The royalties, the amounts and the splits between the different owners of any given copyright, and you know, are first of all subject to negotiation between the parties who created them, then renegotiation, and changes in legislation and new business models emerging, and also regional variance. You know, here, I think I can't speak for everyone, but here in the U.S., there's a certain model that doesn't necessarily apply everywhere else. So, unfortunately, I tried to come up with like a simple model, but there isn't a simple model, or a simple single model. And then just to really admire the problem a little bit longer, within the infrastructure, I think what I'm sort of my takeaways are that there's you know, a couple core issues. One is you've got the database problem. That among, if you look at the publishers and the rights societies and the labels and there's thousands of databases of that information, about that rights information, who owns the copyright, who owns the sound recording, and they're not necessarily compatible, and they're not necessarily aligned. So there you have this matching problem between databases. And then you've got also tons of these, tons is not a very academic term, of these consumption databases. But like I said, I think let's focus on the, well, in any case, there's so many different databases. It seems like almost an inapproachable problem to look at how to harmonize that data and get it aligned. You got different IDs for any given individual, has their different ID for their role as a composer or as a recording artist or as a supporting musician, et cetera. And then, but now we get to the metadata standards. And this is, I make the case that, I know I'm aware of DDEX and there's a relatively good alignment around backing behind DDEX, but I think there's two problems with the metadata. One is that there isn't a definitive mapping between the works code and the recording code. And the other is that music is ingested into the distribution system without the ISWC. So not pointing any fingers, or because I don't have data on people to point fingers at, but I think my understanding here is that music is allowed to enter. You know, the streaming, the DSPs, the digital service providers will take the music whether it has an ISWC or not. So they know who they got the music from, they can pay for the sound recording, but then they don't know who to pay for that works, for the composition. So that's why, again, I would argue that the problem here in the infrastructure is greater for the songwriters. So I think I've already covered sort of most of this around some of the deficiencies in the infrastructure and processes around the systematic adherence to the metadata, efficient processing for sharing the rights data, that's the whole database question, the database problem, scalable systems for the growing pace of digital music releases and detailed per stream reporting. So there I'm really just, this is where as consumption and well, as consumption grows, I mean, the scale of this, the IT infrastructure effectively that needs to support this is something that, you know, very tech savvy and really the tech companies know how to do very well, and hopefully can bring that and hopefully everyone can get super tech savvy. And then this question of willingness to share rights and reporting data openly. As I began to enter this space, the warnings I got from everybody were, this is a space where nobody trusts anybody. And I think that goes back to, so this whole thing about blockchain has come up, and I think blockchain was seen as a possible magical solution to all the problems of the music industry because it's the technology that underlies Bitcoin. For those who don't know what blockchain is, it's this kind of a cryptographic system based on a lack of trust. And it powers cryptocurrencies. So the fact that there's an IT infrastructure for sharing a database across multiple unknown entities that's immutable, can't be tampered with, and is publicly visible, and where it's founded on a lack of trust, that just seemed like the thing that was going to solve everything in the music industry. And I don't think, I think that sort of shiny object syndrome or whatever is kind of wearing off as people realize that, well, the technology is not going to solve the problem. It's a people problem, and technology will come to the aid of the people problem. So I just going back a little bit to the black boxes here. This so Dave is back in the room. So when I was doing this paper, I mentioned I joined the Open Music Initiative through a couple of the startups that I was talking with, and within that forum, which is. There's at the time, about a year back in January, there was maybe 120 companies involved and some 380 people on the internal forum. And I posed a question there. I said, I'd like to understand how big these black boxes are. How much money is tied up in the system? This is the business guy in me from the last 20 years. I mean, wanting to understand, I want to size these problems. And how much money is tied up in the system? It was sort of, you could hear a pin drop. One person said, well, you should ask the PROs. They're the ones who know. But they're not the only people who have these black boxes either. And then the only person who stepped up and said, hey, well, let's have a conversation was Day. And so these are some of the causes for the black boxes. You know, we talked about this inability to identify the rights holders, even though the money is paid and then it's held for well, this needs to be paid to somebody, but we don't know who to pay. Or then the time required to file copyrights. Often the artists are anxious to get the music out, so they don't even start to file a copyright until the music's released. And you might have multiple claims, so that's disputes, you know, unending disputes. And then the last three are here around international, when money flows across PROs, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to sort of gloss over the details. And but the reciprocal agreements between the international parties, the international collecting societies are apparently not very frictionless. So so money gets kind of stuck in the system there. So really, I think to conclude on this, I've got 2 more slides after this about my future research direction, which is really what I wanted to get to. So I think my main takeaways are that modernization of infrastructure and processes is needed. I don't know what that looks like. To enable fast, fair, and full payment of royalties. I won't get into the second bullet because I didn't really cover that here. The paper was published already, so I mean, there's details on the paper. I can distribute the link to that. I talked about blockchain already. One industry insider that I spoke to as part of my next phase of the research highlighted that studied this very deeply over the last year, and there's no problem that blockchain can solve that can't be solved with a single, centralized, authoritative, comprehensive database, and so of rights ownership information. And that goes back to the concluding remarks in the last presentation. So there was an effort that collapsed in 2014 to develop a global repertoire database, and that fell apart. And the kind of a promising thing is that there's changes, there's efforts now in the industry, both around blockchain. You saw a few months ago. Does that mean I'm out of time completely, or does that mean it's like time for questions? Oh, I got 19 seconds. Okay.
And we've got some time for questions.
Okay, so I will chew up question time, because that way, just a little bit. So yeah, there's some good efforts. There's a lot of activity in the last 3 to 6 months around databases. BMI, I think it was BMI and ASCAP just announced that they're going to collaborate on a shared database. And a few months ago, maybe 4 months ago, there was a lot of news around blockchain. And was it, if I remember right, it was ASCAP, PRS in the UK, and SASEM and IBM announcing a blockchain kind of initiative. And they also in Finland, which is the PRO in Finland, just announced a blockchain kind of initiative with a tech partner in Finland, and I think there's an understanding of the problem, and now attempts are being made. So, but let me skip these couple of bullets here and just get to the follow-up research. And this is where, so I mentioned that this basically ended up forming the motivator for me to go back to school and finalize finally get to the research stage of the PhD that I left behind about 23 years ago. And so my intent here is the way I'm going to structure this, and I mentioned Timo Seppälä, and he's my thesis advisor as well as my sort of part-time employer in this side work that I've got at ETLA, is to get into industry, is to get into forecasting and really focus on the industry architecture and sort of the platform side. So that's one nice sentence that kind of captures everything that I'd like to try to get into. The upcoming paper that I'm doing interviews for is based on this Delphi forecasting process. The objective is to really get into what is the core problem. What are the absolute core problems on this infrastructure side? Is it the infrastructure? Is it the metadata? Is the problem in the assets, the format of the assets? You know, the WAV files versus and MP3s versus some new format. Like where are the real core problems that we should be solving, and then and then come up with a vision of this, how the supply chain and the industry architecture will change, and then look at the implications of that. And so this forecasting method, I don't know if people are familiar with the Delphi method. This was kind of proposed to me by my thesis advisor as this would be a great way to move forward, to actually begin to establish a vision. So kind of a blind panel of 30 interviews with thought leaders and heavyweights in the industry, and develop a model of what the future looks like, and then iterate that a couple times with follow-up interviews as they review what I've done, and then see if they've changed their views, if that helped inform them at all, et cetera. So iterate a model of the future, and then base further sort of research around that to look for business, kind of what the impacts for, and the changes in value creation, value capture will be, and so what the impacts of this predicted future, likely likely future outcome, industry architecture will be. And so then in the future, and now this is, geez, I shouldn't have said econometric here in a room of economists. I'm sure I've misused the term. But this gets to kind of the business guy in me. Like I want to understand in following papers, really understand size the problem. Like I mentioned this, how big is the value gap, or how big is the black box? What's the actual size of the problem that we're trying to solve? And I think the rest of those I've already covered. So you've got 29 seconds to ask me. I'm so glad I chewed up the question time. But I'm really eager to meet with industry experts in the room as I prepare the second stage of the research around that Delphi interview and process. And I'm very open to the things that I outlined there as future research. If those things are just completely off the wall and impossible to achieve in a 2 or 3 year window with limited resources and for a dissertation, very much like to get guidance and input and ideas on really where to focus. So, thanks for the opportunity to solicit input here.
Enjoy asking you questions over breaks later on.
Sounds good.
Okay, and the timer is starting. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. Thanks, Alan and Jeannie. My name is Taylor Kirch. I am the lead librarian at Pandora. So what does that mean? I help manage the Pandora library by unraveling legacy and partner-delivered metadata, overseeing day-to-day curation content operations, and I also create taxonomies and other descriptive metadata schemas. And if you want any more info about that, I'm happy to answer questions in the break. It's kind of a separate topic. So what am I going to talk about today? Music metadata, rights management, and the role of human curation. We've already had a very interesting question on the role of human curation, and happy to touch base with you about every person who's on our team and associated teams. So today I'm going to delve into some of the limitations of partner-delivered metadata, how it necessitates human curation early in the content pipeline, and how curators and librarians can solve numerous problems that machines can't. Our algorithms in science are only as smart as the people creating both the data and the algorithm. So we kind of have to delve into that a little bit more. So at Pandora, we focus on appreciating and understanding where data science and curation fit into the content pipeline respectively. And ultimately, when science and curation work together, we all accomplish more. So we have talked about this a lot. I will not try to rehash a lot of the details, but one of the things I want to focus on is Pandora's unique situation. We operated under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act for a long time. Let's say 15 years, 15-ish years. So that means that we operated under federal mandates that required accurate content metadata and precise attribution of the creators and publishers of that content. So metadata about the distributor, label, artist, as well as the unique identifiers mentioned thus far, UPC, ISRC, were crucial to our content management strategy for non-interactive radio licensing. So working with Sound Exchange, working with BMI, ASCAP, PRO organizations. So we actually, through our transition, we had to deal with a new concept of rights and royalty management at scale. So now we have millions of releases coming through via the DDEX ERN standard, increasing number of artists and labels. And publishing rights especially pose a large challenge, as numerous presenters have mentioned. And it's a great example of where human curation and data quality assurance is imperative. So we also have to think about the legacy collection updates. You know, how do we reconcile recordings and rights across these databases? So moving from DMCA to on-demand, we are now faced with different licensing. We're faced with different metadata standards. How do we reconcile those databases? How do we make sure that we're accurately reporting to downstream systems? So we're going to go into a few of the things that were mentioned, so I'm going to kind of go back through this just briefly. Unique identifier coverage, unstandardized metadata, rights are constantly in flux. DDEX consortiums are attempting to create standards around these conventions and musical works. So as mentioned, the ISWC, we're at about a 5% coverage rate. We haven't thrown out that percent yet, 5%. That is according to the recent details. ISRC coverage is around 98%. More or less. But like Anoosha pointed out, that doesn't necessarily translate to the work level. And the way that I see it between recording and work is a different abstraction level. Recordings are the items, you know, think of them as the individual CD versions that you're looking at. The work level is, you know, Beethoven's Fifth, you know, it's Frank Sinatra's My Way as an entity, as this abstract concept of a composition. We have to figure out how to map them, and we have to figure out through this fire hose of content, how do we create the best listener experience? And the amount of manual resources needed to keep up with the volume is near impossible. You know, from the actual providers to the publishing rights organizations to all of the different components of this workflow, we cannot expect 100% accuracy. Even if we had a centralized database, there is only so much we can do with textual information. We are dealing with strings. We are dealing with keystrokes. You know, we're humans, you know, we're not, well, anyway, well, we're not machines yet, so. So when it comes to, you know, increased need for quality assurance, you know, we're talking about audio quality. We're talking about excessive duplicative records and incorrect artist and label attribution. And I'm also going to go into this concept of misleading and unexpected content. I'll give a few examples of that, but that's what I like to call pardon? Yeah, this is what I like to call, you know, the realm of music that we don't expect to see in a clean collection of music that an average listener would want to see. Okay, so that's not too hard, right? I mean, that's pretty simple. I mean, there's only so many arrows going so many directions. And this is a simplified version, right? This is a simplified version of how all of these entities relate and how their dependencies on metadata affect the end consumers, affect the distributors and the aggregators, affect the performing artists, the songwriters, and all of the organizations that help manage that information. So, not too bad, right? I mean, this is kind of the point of this whole conference, right? Is this slide right here. How do we manage this? So, I'm going to talk about curation. Humans are smarter in context. So we contextualize subjective information to enhance listener experience. We validate metadata with a high degree of accuracy, and we can talk later if anyone wants to talk to me about the difference between accuracy and precision. I'm happy to talk about that. Those of you who are familiar with statistical models and clustering will have a familiarity with this concept. So humans are great at accuracy, not so much at large-scale metadata issues. So Some of these technologies that we're discussing are still in the nascent phases of development. So we still need human metadata reconciliation as a necessary process. So we're going to go into some of the ways in which we provide ground truth and automation for machine learning and listening. Okay, so let's go into a few examples. Distinguishing elements of audio recordings. Here is something that humans do explicitly well. How does a machine discern between F, beep, and F, fill in the blank? That is a very difficult problem to solve without human ears actually taking a listen. Is this the clean version? Is it the edited version? And around, I want to say 60% of the partner-delivered metadata comes with unknown or null values for our explicit information. So that's 60 to 70% of our collection that we just don't know. Is it clean? Is it explicit? Does it have offensive content? So genre identification, we touched on classical, EDM. I'm actually going to go into a few other genres. Think of contextual genres like Christian or holiday. You have Christian rap, you have Christian metal, you have Christian rock and country. Now, if I am a black metal listener, do I want Christian metal on my black metal station? Probably not. If I'm a Christian metal fan, I probably do not want black metal on my Christian metal station. So when it comes to making recommendations, genre classification is extremely important in these contextual ways. Also versioning. So when it comes down to the limits of machine listening, we have how many remixes of Robin S.'s Show Me Love? Very popular song. We have 100 by 100 different remixers. And from an audio standpoint, you get those lyrics in there, you get her harmonies, you get her melodies. It's very hard to discern the differences between that remix and that other remix. Same with live versions. I mean, how would you be able to tell, especially if the labeling conventions aren't that great, that it is the 1967 version from the Independent versus the 1969 version from the Fillmore, and how would we expect our listeners to, do they care? Is this something that they care about? Do they only want to hear things from the Fillmore? We don't know. It's not up to us to judge which versions of songs people want and how they are delivered to them. This is all personalized. It's a personalized service. So it's not necessarily us to judge. So therefore, we have to make those distinguishing edits and metadata validations to make sure that they are distinguished as two separate recordings. So this kind of fits into the rights pipeline. We've kind of talked about this. What version of what song is owned by what person? If there are, two versions of the same song that are under two different labels, two different distributors, how do you reconcile that rights information using metadata conventions? So again, talking about misleading and unexpected content. So let's talk about sound alikes and covers. I think we can skip over, we talked kind of about compilations a little bit in Anoosha's, and stock music for generic playlistings, let's call that spa music, let's call that relaxation music, let's call that whale sounds. How many whale sounds do we need, for the best listener experience? This is an open question, very subjective. We need to figure out what's best for the personalized experience that comes with the recommendation service, that comes with our lean back radio experience. So those are like some of the high level things that we deal with. I have a million other examples of how this all deals with rights, how it deals with versioning, as well as like what it means to create a quality collection for a recommendation service. And you notice how I keep mentioning recommendation service as opposed to on demand. We have a multi-tiered service offering. So a lot of the decisions that we make for a recommendation library depends on a lot of these things. When you're in an on-demand world, if you want to listen to whale sound after whale sound after whale song, hey buddy, that is up to you. no judgment here, but when it comes to recommendation service, we have to make sure we're not playing whale song A and then whale song B. I mean, unless you really love dolphins and orcas, I just don't know. So we can talk about more of that during the break. I'm getting there. Okay. So I'm going to kind of fly through this a little bit because I want to get to the kind of the meat of the situation and what we're doing to expand on this. So we disambiguate artists. So that helps our downstream systems recognize, which aurora are we actually talking about? There's like 12 of them in our system. Is this aurora from the UK? Is this the aurora from Norway, New York City, Boston? I mean, come on, give me a break. Someone needs to tell these people that aurora is just taken. We're just done with this. So, we need to be able to talk about this. And I don't think that this is actually the right one, so I'm just gonna skip over this one, but yeah. Okay, so what are the challenges with human curation? Well, there are only so many hours in the day, only so many people can be hired and managed, only so many people can have experience with certain genres of music. And we also have to realize that every single manual step, every click adds time to our speed to spin. It adds time to how we can release that music on time to our listeners' expectations. We can't manually validate every single release like we used to, and that actually is a case. We have music analysts, musicologists, classically trained musicians, PhDs, masters, who are all adding attributes to the music themselves. We used to analyze everything that came in the door. We used to analyze whatever we wanted. Now we're in a direct deal world. How do we decide what attributes to add to what songs, what annotations to add to what songs in order to help with our recommendation processes and to give the best listener experience possible? So a major solution that highlights the marriage of science and curation is automating curation. So that means we can scale, we can handle the volume. Machine learning models, they learn and improve over time. Then, like Anoosha was saying, we can bypass actual textual inconsistencies and move towards other models. Audio fingerprinting, blockchain, let's go for it. I mean, they can't hurt. I certainly don't want to edit every single title or figure out if it's Snoop Dogg or Snoop Doggy Dogg, P. Diddy, P. Puff Diddy. No more. So how do we, so some of the things that we're doing right now is collaboration and iteration between curation and science. So we develop heuristics that closely imitate how the curators curate. How do we group labels? How do we alias labels? How do we identify what labels are the same? And then we also verify the models. So, we create a training set, so I'll get to this one. Years of manually editing and disambiguating is actually now a benefit. We have this huge data set that can provide ground truth, And that is extremely important when it comes to then adding machine learning and listening on top of what we've already done. So in some ways, our DMCA model that allowed us to kind of add all this information provided us a leg up in this whole game of delivering the best listener experience through our recommendation models. So, when it comes down to, and again, crowdsourcing, this past year, hiring 50 contractors to help edit metadata, whatever it takes, short-term solutions for long-term gain. If we have 50 people coming in helping us edit our metadata, that is a great return of investment for a short period of time. In the long term, that is unmanageable. It isn't cost-effective to have a team of 1,000 editing metadata. I mean, maybe, I don't know. That given all the things we've been talking about. So developing logic to automatically disambiguate and make text normalizations are some of the most amazing things that we're working on right now. It's what I'm most excited about. So that is using third-party data. That's figuring out how we make our decisions to disambiguate. So for example, we disambiguate by genre, by location, by era. We say this group is from this country, from this era, and therefore we can make a distinct conclusion that they are two separate entities. We can then give that information, that heuristic, to our science teams to then replicate in an automated way. So it's like we have all of this brain power, this knowledge, this logic for the past 15 years of how we have curated our collection and curated our library. And now we're saying, okay, let's take that thought, let's take that logic, translate it into if-then statements, translate it into heuristics that can then provide extreme knowledge bases for our advanced technologies. And I would say that from the takeaways of this, if you can take away anything, is that metadata inconsistencies are rampant within the industry. We've established this. Not enough manual resources to fix them, probably ever. You know, we can talk about a global music database, we can talk about standards bodies on standards bodies. In the library world, we make jokes that that it's kind of an infinite regress of standards bodies. You have a standards body for the standards body for the standards body for the standards body. So we kind of need to figure out automation and curation as this alchemy and amalgam of technologies and contextual knowledge. So we provide context and validation, but we can't scale. Automation and machine learning tackle scale, but can't discern some of the minutia that we've discussed. And if we work together, we can optimize the content and rights management strategy across the entire pipeline. So with that, I think I've probably taken up my questions. Questions? Anyone? Yes?
You said that 60% of the fields were full, 40% were empty. Am I got it right?
60% empty, yeah.
How many of them have you been able to fill in? I have two questions. One, how many of them have you been able to fill in? And secondly, are the new releases better than the older ones?
That's a great question. So sometimes it's genre-based. So think about it like this. If we have a better chance of having more complete data if we know that there is an edited or a clean version out there. So think of Blank You and Forget You, that song that came out. We know that that is the explicit version and the clean version. And then we have a hip hop album that came out. We have all of the swear words in it. And then we have an edited version. That is the industry expectation, that there is a parental advisory on one release and that we can expect a radio version for the other. Some of the discrepancies then come with content that exists in the gray area. What about a rock song that only has one swear word in it? Are they really going to spend the time if there's no other version? So it really comes down to, does this release have multiple versions? Is it inherently explicit? Metal is a great example. And then you get to the distinctions, and this is a whole topic in and of itself. From a radio perspective, from a lean back perspective, you have this going on in businesses and spas. Not that spas are listening to metal music, but maybe, I don't know. If you have a lean back experience, do you want offensive content? What's the difference between offensive and explicit? Are you talking about certain topics that you don't want playing in your restaurant? Might not be family friendly. Those are the types of distinctions that for a lean back experience makes that area even harder to unravel. And in terms of what you're talking about, we've developed heuristics and logic to create a very large script that populates offensive and rude values in our system using kind of the logical choices that we've made over the years.
Pandora developed the music genome, which was based on a large set of subjective data, trying to use cognitive psychology theory and identify salient portions of a given genre versus another genre and so on. How much of this work informs currently the automated curation efforts that you're making?
A lot of it, actually. So we have to think about it in two ways. We have musicological attributes. They're not as subjective, actually. Is it a minor key? Is it a major key? We have, some subjective elements, when it comes down to the subject matter, literally subjective.
Subjective, I mean, in the psychology terms.
Yes.
You collect data from people, you ask them for a response, and you use the data.
Great, thank you for the context, yes. So we use that data, we make combinations of those attributes, we say, okay, how do these attributes work together? Does that set of attributes then create another set of attributes? Can we derive conclusions about certain sectors of that data to allow even greater conclusions about the music that we have? Yeah.
Do you check this against a large population, or do you sample employees and then get some data, let's say 20 data points, and to validate some of your hypotheses?
Yes, I would defer to our programmatic programming team. I know that that's hard to, but think about it in a radio sense. So our computational programming department, that's where the machine learning comes in. The Music Genome Project solves the cold start recommendation issues, and then it becomes testing and verifying and iterating over those models using the machine learning algorithms we have.
I know one more question I had one earlier that I'm sure you want to follow up on. Maybe Dave, you can get set up, and Taylor, if there's a quick question back here on the musicology issues, you could just kind of address it from the side of the room.
Sure.
Maybe set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I'll ask the question and I'll hand it to Mike.
Yeah.
There's so many, let me just ask one. It's a chance to ask a question about how does it actually happen. The voice Pandora is fascinating. Let me pose this one. In the world that I live in, we become aware that, and I'm not saying it's specifically your data, but data created by companies like you are then used by academics to sort of make statements about how music is or is not. So the map sort of becomes the territory. And just because I'm talking to the head librarian, right, do you keep records? And if you do, can you say anything about it, about who actually does the curation? Because I have become aware of the idea that we may actually just be in a tautological loop, where what we are actually saying is people who sort of, we're not actually talking about music, we're talking about sort of, talking about sort of curation decisions made by people we don't know anything about, which we are then sort of just recycling into what we think of as research. So I'm just curious if is there a field somewhere that says, like this was inspected by number 27, like you see on your shoes. Is there any record of who made any of these decisions, or is that going to be lost for all time?
So that's a good yes or no question.
Yeah.
Yes and no. So 2 seconds. Musicologists, all of that is recorded. We have a concept of provenance in the library world where we keep track of things moving through the pipeline with different elements. Our curators are actually just, think of them as agnostic observers of the things going through the pipeline, mostly fixing typos and disambiguating artists. So the people who are making the real contributions towards some of the things we're talking about are definitely tracked through the provenance of our objects.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to try to keep this really quick going through the slides because I think most of the value is going to be in the Q&A. My name is Dave Bogan. I am the founder and chief researcher, and I use that term very lightly, of Royalty Claim. I'm also the founder and CEO of Tune Registry, which is a company that handles metadata and delivers metadata to a number of organizations. Royalty Claim is a new project. It's based on ongoing research. The Royalty Claim Initiative, which started in my graduate years as where I got my master's in music business with a focus on music publishing and copyright administration, looking into the global music licensing ecosystem and inefficiencies that result in black box royalties, unclaimed royalties, and other issues that I'm going to highlight. So this is a highlight of what may be a paper in the very near future. So what is black box? Derek's already gone over that, so we can skip through it. But the answer-ish is that a black box is an escrow fund in which music royalties are held due to an organization's inability to attribute the royalties earned to the appropriate payee. That's kind of the quickest, efficient answer-ish. And then generally, it's all of that, which Derek already captured on his slide. So here's a couple of examples in the real world. So general licensing in the PRO world, the public performance world. You have thousands of businesses and restaurants and coffee shops and shopping centers and nightclubs entering into blanket licenses with public performance organizations. They receive this license to play the catalogs, the full catalog of these PROs, and then they pay license fees back to the PROs. Most of the time in the general licensing world, they are not telling the PROs what music they actually played in the businesses. It's just, here's a check for us having access to play all the compositions in your system. And that results in unattributed blanket license royalties into a black box. Now, this is a particularly interesting concept because this black box actually does get distributed in a way. What happens is some larger players in the publishing world come in and say, I have 32% or 25%, 26% of the market, so we claim 26% of this black box. But the reality is most of the black box money from general licensing are coming from music that may be cataloged, that may be legacy artists, maybe undiscovered emerging artists who are not the top 40 artists on the radio. So the relationship to, I think, where a lot of the market share information is coming from doesn't translate to where the music consumption is happening in the general licensing space. All right, another example is unattributed cash advances paid to music companies. So I'm a new music app, I'm starting up, I give an advance to a label in exchange for access to their entire catalog of the sound recordings, and then I just give them a periodic statement of usage, and the label will attribute those usage statements against that advance to make payments to the artists. But and so the artist gets paid, yay, great. You know, you got a usage statement, comes from advances, and then once you go beyond that advance, there's additional royalties paid out from the service provider. But what happens when you're a service provider and you don't actually generate enough usage to make up for that advance that you paid? Well, when that contract ends, those monies fall into black box. So you have a label that may have leftover advance money that's not attributed to any specific artist, and that falls into that label's black box. Now, there's been, trade conversations about artists being upset with their labels, learning that they had advances or not having access to that information. Some labels have gotten better at that, but it's still an issue. Another example, which we mentioned in terms of the international consequence of the United States limits on sound recording rights, is so you have a foreign radio broadcaster and a foreign collection society. So let's say a radio station in the UK and the PRS and PPL. So the radio station in the foreign territory is going to pay their license fees for the public performance of the composition as well as the sound recordings to their local PRO or collection societies. Some of them call it CMOs. And then that collection society is going to pay past composition royalties on to the United States collection societies, which obviously are ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMR as well, and then pay their local foreign artists on the composition side as well as the sound recording side. And then the U.S. Collection Society is going to pay U.S. artists' composition side. What's happening is, as you see, that lighter arrow has stopped at some point, right? It hasn't moved all the way on to the U.S. artists. And that's because we don't have a U.S. performance right for sound recordings. So if I'm who's a popular, if you mentioned Drake and Justin Bieber so much this conference, they're in my head, but neither of them are U.S. artists. So Kendrick Lamar, right? He's getting performances in the UK. Well, technically, the UK is not going to send back royalties to the US, to a US PRO on behalf of the sound recording side of his performances because we don't have a sound recording right. And because we're not sending money to the UK for Adele. My perspective is, by the way, I should have prefaced all of this by saying my perspective in general is the DIY musician. So as an educator and an entrepreneur, I always talk from this perspective of a DIY musician who handles their own rights and who are not represented by publishers and labels. Most of the conversation is always about what labels and publishers should do, and the conversation is almost rarely about what the millions of DIY musicians should do. And my company services DIY musicians. So a DIY musician, an indie band, which we service hundreds of, don't have a publisher to go to all these rights organizations to collect the performance side, public performance side of the sound recording for them, so that goes into black box, gets distributed locally to publishers who do have access to that. And that just explains what I just said. So you asked the question, what is the value of the black box? No one really knows the value of the black box. There are values of black boxes. There's thousands of black boxes. If we were able to gather the values of all those black boxes, it would probably be somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. And the black box is not just one particular right. I'm not talking about the $2 to $3 billion for just performance rights or $2 to $3 billion of just mechanical rights. We're talking about everything, including direct licenses, the advances against those, talking about all types of places where revenue is earned against the uses of music and not being attributed to artists or songwriters. For me, that's black box. So, speaking of streaming services, we didn't talk much about streaming services to this conference. What we did talk about is the growth and the optimism of the industry a lot here, which I think is great. So I hate to be the depression cloud because I'm going to talk a little about the challenges. So as some of you know, what's hot in the trades right now is the mass filing of address unknown Section 115s. And that's just a term that's kind of picked up. Address unknown is not a technical term. It's a Section 115 NOI. It's a completely legal procedure for obtaining a license to use the compositions in digital services, but at consequence. So some quick background before I move forward. Number one, interactive streaming services generally obtain sound recordings from record labels, distributors, and aggregators. Often the metadata received by services include track and release information, but omit information regarding the underlying composition. U.S. copyright law requires a service to obtain licenses for both the master sound recording and the underlying composition. The Copyright Act, however, provides a provision, the Section 115, for obtaining the compulsory mechanical license in the event a prospective licensee cannot locate the copyright owner. In 2016, the Copyright Office implemented a solution and guidance for electronically filing notice of intentions under the Section 115 provision for the purpose of obtaining the compulsory license. As a result, interactive services have mass filed millions of address unknown, meaning they can't locate or can identify or locate the copyright owner, to the Copyright Office. And this must be discovered by the copyright owner in order for the copyright owner to effectively make themselves known to the licensee and complete the licensing process so they can unlock their mechanical royalties. So here we are. As of June 30th, only 15 digital music services so far have utilized the mass filing method based on records from the U.S. Copyright Office Licensing Division. I'll leave it up for a couple seconds if anyone's trying to take pictures. I see some hands. So only 15 so far. Noticeably, not all of these companies are actual digital music services. I thought it was interesting to see the Recording Academy on here. I've already contacted them to talk about that. So digital music services paid the U.S. Copyright Office $1,842,719 to file 16 million NOIs in the first half of 2017. That's where we are 2017. This data does not include April of 2016 through the end of 2016. This is just this year, the first half of 2017. So in 2017, there's over 16 million notice of intents that have been filed with the Copyright Office, which copyright owners must discover themselves in that batch to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, this is me, you can start paying me my mechanicals. But that's a whole other story. The deferred mechanical royalty obligation for one stream per NOI would be about $3,000 for an ad-supported service and $10,000 for premium. So what this claim is stating is if you took 16 million NOIs and had them all those titles play one time in a service like Pandora, the mechanical royalty obligation would be $3,000 for ad-supported or $10,000 for premium, which is interesting. So we spent almost $2 million in filing fees and deferred only $3,000 to $10,000 in mechanicals per stream, obviously. This numbers can be taken in different ways. Obviously, some songs will get tens of thousands and millions of streams, and obviously more mechanical royalties. But this is one interesting fact. So here we are. Here are the services. This is the first time this particular information has been published or shown anywhere because we have the data. So Google is the number one for 2017 for this date period, January 1st to June 30th, followed by Spotify and then Microsoft. So these are the number of NOIs filed in the Copyright Office for the first half of this year. And these are the filing fees paid by service for those filings for the first half of the year. So what Google is saying is that here we have 6.7 million titles that we cannot identify the copyright owner, which is interesting because Google acquired, if you remember, RightsFlow, which was a mechanicals organization, and they also own Content ID, which absorbs millions of information about copyright owners. So it's interesting to me that Google can't identify copyright owners, but here we are nevertheless. So what happens when pays are identified but are still not paid? I call that unclaimed royalty funds. In the US, we have about 30 funds and sub-funds. Now, this chart is showing on the right side the fund administrator, the organization that actually administers the fund, and then the particular name of the fund or sub-fund within that organization. So it's not necessarily 30 organizations, but we're talking about the actual funds. Some organizations oversee several funds. The funds are derived from particular licenses and agreements. Some of them are statutory, some are compulsory, some of them are bilateral agreements between trade organizations like AFM and SAG-AFTRA and the music industry and the TV industry. Some of them are reciprocal agreements between territories and so forth. So we track in a very granular way each sub-fund, what caused that, or what's causing that fund, what right owner or payee is supposed to be paid as a result of that fund, and what are the sources of royalties that pay into that fund. Everything from audio devices and automobiles to CDs and streaming. So we track all of that. So this is just kind of going over the different funds. Now, some of these organizations are not traditional music rights organizations, but nevertheless, they have black boxes, so we include them in this list. So it goes on and on. So imagine being a DIY musician, that's our perspective, a DIY musician, and having to know that there's all these organizations and all these different royalties that are not royalties from live music, as far as performing a gig, or not royalties from selling a CD. Right? These are all other royalty types that are being generated and collected without necessarily, without the knowledge of those artists. So the funds that we currently have information in our system, we have over 100,000 payee names, actual persons or beneficiaries who have checks that are unclaimed in our system. And here's a breakdown. About half of that is Sound Exchange alone. 49% is checks at Sound Exchange that are currently owed to payees that have not been paid out. Interesting enough, there's 40% of that are background musicians, session musicians and background vocalists that are not aware that they generate royalties from digital services like Pandora, SiriusXM, Music Choice, and 2,500 other webcasters when they play on sound recordings in studio sessions. And then there's some smaller funds that are shrinking even more, like this sound recording special payments funds and the film musician secondary market fund. Interesting enough, the film musician secondary market fund, this little sliver of 8,000 checks, is a perpetuity royalty. It's always going to exist, and it gets passed down from the rights owner to their beneficiary to the next beneficiary. And there's people who are the grandchildren of composers or musicians of films from decades ago who are owed money. All the other slices of this pie have statutes of limitations of 3 years. If you see this third column, we talk about the fund limitation. This is when those monies will be no longer eligible to be paid out to the payee. So imagine you're a musician and you're working hard and you're making music, and you don't know that these funds are collecting all these royalties because some of these funds are created from legislation. Someone earlier talked about Audio Home Recording Act, the digital, the DART, and other types of legislation and collective agreements that you're not a part of, and you have 3 years to figure it out, otherwise your money disappears. So this is our high-level view of how information is piped into our system. The red is the royalty claim environment. The other buckets outside of it are the different sources of information. Obviously, our main source of information for Section 115 NOIs is the Copyright Office, which publishes it, although we are trying to work directly with organizations to, Harry Fox shouldn't be there twice, there's supposed to be another organization there, but get direct information. Because even the Copyright Office, when they publish it, the information, it's kind of, there's a little delay between when it was actually filed, and when it was received and when it was posted. And we want to be as quickly as possible. All right, so I have 30 seconds left, so I'll see you guys outside. But here's a quick view of how it works. What happened there? Okay, cool. So here's just a quick of how a royalty claim works.
This is your webpage?
Yep. By the way, we're launching today here. We haven't launched yet. So you identify yourself. We have other search features, and you can initiate a claim in our system. And we have this whole thing of a notice of initiation of a claim. We're currently working with rights administrators to be able to deliver claim information so that they can help the process of identifying if a claimant is accurate to match a claimant to a particular NOI. As far as royalties, when it comes to royalty payments like Sound Exchange, the claimant will be able to go to Sound Exchange directly, complete the information they need to complete to unlock their royalties and get their check. So our next step is to tackle international black boxes. We're already starting to get fees from PRS, quantify the unclaimed royalty funds. Some ways we can do that is by looking at marketplace data like consumption, calculate that against royalty rates, and then calculate that against the checks that we have in our system. And then connect more partners to the royalty claim. Our goal is to be agnostic. We want to simply provide transparency and information to music rights owners and music creators in one place. And right now it's fragmented, it's scattered, it's all over the place, and it's not efficient or easy. So that's it. Sure.
Where does the money go if it's in a fund for 3 years, it goes unclaimed and out, so artists no longer the right?
Great question. That's debatable or arguable. It depends on the fund, right? There's many different black boxes, and they have different procedures. Some of these black boxes are attached to policy, right? Like the Audio Home Recording Act. So there's specifications in policy that determines how the funds should be used. And
Sound Exchange is the example I'm most familiar with.
I don't have, So unfortunately, they're not necessarily, not everyone is publishing where the money goes. Now I have a theory, but we can talk about that off the record. Generally, this money is supposed to be distributed back to the members who've already joined the organizations. That's kind of the spiel that we get. So I'm gonna stick to that. Yeah. how much money have we recovered? Well, unfortunately, when it comes to the unclaimed royalties database, all we have is payee information and the fund administrator. They don't provide us with the actual amount. So what we're trying to do here is when you complete a claim, to close out the claim, you're supposed to insert what that royalty amount was, what that check value was, so we can start painting a picture. So as we're identifying or matching individuals to unclaimed checks, as we close those things out, we're going to input the value, what was it, a $500 check, was it 3 cents, whatever that may be, and also dates, because we want to see, what is that turnaround time from, because again, some of these have a 3-year term. If we determine that the average unclaimed royalty is claimed in 2.5 years, that may, there may be some insight for that. There was a hand back there.
Thank you, it was very, very impressive.
Thank you.
How did you arrive at that $2 to $3 billion number for total black boxes? What did it become like?
Right. So there's sources. So that particular number had been cited in an article in Billboard. I can get you the article. So there's different sources. It's wild all over the place. To be honest, again, it's hard to value because no one publishes the information of the value of the black box, of their particular black boxes. I mean, most organizations that have a black box will tell you they don't have a black box. So it's one of those things where we know how many checks we have. We also know how many NOIs we have. We can start looking at music consumption data and start making projections. We haven't got that far into the data analysis yet.
Was that an international number?
That was international. That was a global black boxes. That was not US, by the way.
Thank you very much.
For sure.
Independent brand, we should be coffee out there.